Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my mid-April wrap up. So if you are unfamiliar with why I do mid-month wrap-ups, it's because I tend to talk quite a lot and I used to really hate it when I got to the end of the month and I'd be sat here filming for an hour. So now I do 2 wrap-ups per month. There will be no reading statistics in this video. If you want my reading statistics for the month, they will be in my end of April wrap-up. So in the month of April so far, I have read a total of 6 books. I am participating in the Owl's Magical Readathon. 5 of the books I've read so far do count for various owls and the other one was a complete impulse that I can't fit in anywhere else, but I really needed to read it. If you guys did see my hella mega owls TBR, you will know that I am on a little bit of a strict schedule this month because I am going for all 12 owls, and since I added an impulse read, that is 13 books in total. I am currently on track to read 13 books in April. I'm shocked that I am still on track and I have my fingers crossed that I can stay on track for the rest of the month. So getting into the reviews of the books that I've read in the first half of April, the book that I kicked off the month with was Fortuna, Swan by KJ Sutton, which I loved so much that I then immediately picked up Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton. So Fortuna, Swan and Restless Slumber are the first 2 books in an eventual 6-part dark fairy romance series. These books are self-published and they were sent to me by the author to review, and I absolutely loved these books. So in this series we follow Fortuna, and Fortuna is a supernatural creature. She is a nightmare. Now what this means is that she can make people believe that their worst nightmares are coming true. This can be anything from giving them a fright to literally scaring them to death. Now Fortuna for the most part does live in the human world. She works in a bar and the first book kicks off straight away where Fortuna has been kidnapped and is about to be sold into slavery. While she is in this situation, a mysterious male comes along and they have an interesting conversation and she pretty much brushes him off. Now while Fortuna does start this series in a very interesting position, she does very quickly break free and heads back home where she meets this mysterious man again and quickly discovers that he is an extremely powerful fairy who has information on the whereabouts of Fortuna's brother who disappeared 2 years ago without a trace. This guy is called Colith and he is willing to give Fortuna this information and take her to rescue her brother, providing she marries him and heads down to the Unseelie court with him. So this is a very dark, very adult fairy romance. I would say that the darkness and the smut level in the first book aren't too extreme. However, things do definitely ramp up in the sequel. There are a ton of trigger warnings for this series, including things like themes of slavery, torture, toxic relationships, forced marriage, and in one of the books there is an extremely graphic rape scene. So be very careful going into these, make sure you're prepared. I really like the main character of Fortuna. She is 100% flawed. She has some pretty unlikable traits. She's stubborn, she repeats herself over and over again. She's literally like a broken record. She's very loyal. She will do anything for the people that she loves. She essentially has really big Taurus energy, which as a Taurus, it's probably why I actually like her and can relate to her a little bit. There are several love interests in this series. There are, I would say, 3 in total. Obviously, Colith is one of them, and Colith is my favorite. He is this dark, powerful, mysterious fairy. He is a little bit like Rhysand, especially the Rhysand that we see under the mountain. Sexual tension between those 2 in these books was on fire. Literally rooting for their relationship so damn hard. While love triangles and love squares are sometimes a little bit off-putting, I really like the way that it's done in here because we have 2 fairies and then there is another love interest that I don't like to talk about too much. However, that third love interest is really interesting because I really like the dynamic it created between that love interest and also Colith, because it was almost an expectations versus reality kind of situation that I think really added this interesting dynamic as Fortuna battles between what she thinks she wants and what she actually wants. This is also a hate to love romance because Fortuna does not like fairies. She has been burned by fairies before. She knows they're tricksters. She knows they're untrustworthy. So when this fairy guy comes to her and says, "You have to marry me," she obviously agrees so that she can save the one person that she loves the most in the world, her brother. However, she vows to herself and outright says that the one thing that she is not going to do is fall in love with Colith. Watching them 2 battle it out out, and the will they won't they of their relationship was definitely one of my favorite aspects of this story. The characters are definitely the best part of these books. I would say that the plot is a little bit shaky. Fortuna Swan is definitely more well structured than Restless Slumber. With Restless Slumber, I did feel like the plot had more elements than it needed to. Some of the plot elements could definitely have been trimmed out, and it would have been a stronger story, I would say, if the elements that remained were delved into a little deeper. But I am 100% in love with these characters, and when I fall in love with characters, I literally just want more of them, and Restless Slumber definitely provided that. Something else I especially appreciated in these books was the darkness. Now, Fortuna Swan, as I said, is nothing too extreme. However, Restless Slumber just continues to get darker and darker, and I'm very, very excited and also interested and also terrified to see where the third and remaining books in this series are gonna go, because the whole chain of events at the end of the books that I read were just a massive catalyst, and there are going to be a whole ton of repercussions and consequences to come. My heart is scared, but I also I need to read, because one thing that you definitely cannot deny about these books is that they are extremely compelling. It is very unlike me to go straight from the first book in a series and read right through to the second, no matter how much I want to, but the way that big plot elements and plot twists are revealed in these books means that you literally cannot put them down, and you have to keep reading. One thing I will say about these though is that they do have a lot of parallels to the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I have read that Kelsey was actually inspired by the ACOTAR series. The main character of Fortuna is definitely her own character, but the love interest is heavily inspired by Rhysand, I would say, and the plot of the first book does include a series of trials that are very similar to the ones that take place under the mountain in A Court of Thorns and Roses. So as a reader, I imagine that you are either going to think it's a little bit too close to ACOTAR, or you will think about it as I did, where this pretty much took all of the things that I love about books in general, all of the things I love about ACOTAR, and just put them all into one series, and I cannot get enough. Next, I picked up The Dead House by Dawn Kurtagich. This is a young adult horror. So this is a story that is told entirely in diary entries, video transcripts, audio interview transcripts, and all compiled to tell the story of a high school that burned down 25 years prior to when the story is being told. We do follow various timelines in here, but the main one is the perspective of a girl called Caitlin, and we are reading her journal. Now, Caitlin is an interesting character because she only exists at nighttime. Her and her sister Carly do exist in the same body, and the whole crux of this story is for the reader to decide whether Caitlin is a product of dissociative identity disorder, or whether she is a second soul that is sharing a body with another soul. So I give this one 3 stars overall. I didn't love it. I feel like if I'd have consumed this in a different medium, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. If there was an audiobook of this, and then maybe I haven't looked into it, but if there was an audiobook that was like the Illuminate files with sound effects and crackles and creepy eerie voices and things like that, I definitely think I would have given this a much higher rating. However, with it being 1, an unreliable narrator, and 2, very ambiguous, which is something that I traditionally just do not get on with in any form of media, I did find it a little bit of a struggle to believe this story. One of the reasons for that is that while I cannot 100% say for certain, because I have no point of reference for dissociative identity disorder, I would pretty much say that this is a terrible portrayal of DID. As well as that, it does heavily imply negligence within the mental health sector. And then if we go to the other side of this novel, where Caitlin may be a second soul sharing a body, the mystical, magical aspects of that I wasn't really into. Dawn Kurtagich creates in here a Scottish practice called Marla, which is, I assume, very similar to Wicca. It's a form of magic, and one of the characters in here is a practitioner of Marla. However, considering this is a made-up, let's say, religion, the groundwork just wasn't really done there. We are just taking one particular character at her word for everything she says about this entire situation. Because I do feel like I would have enjoyed this better in another medium, the horror aspects just didn't really hit with me. I'm just not good at suspending my disbelief. That is just generally true across the board for pretty much anything I read. I hate ambiguous stories. I hate ambiguous endings, because I'm trying to puzzle things out as I go, and when there is multiple types of evidence that are leading to 2 possible outcomes and you never actually get the outcome on paper, it's just really not for me. My brain just cannot handle it, and it just results in a very unbelievable story from my perspective. Aside from that, this was a quick read. It was a pretty compelling story. It was definitely easy to read. It just it just wasn't for me. Next up, I did DNF a book extremely quickly. That was Battleground by Rachel Churcher. I don't really want to dwell on this. This was a young adult dystopian that was sent to me unsolicited by the author last year. It's self-published. I never wanted to read it in the first place, but it did just arrive on my doorstep and Bookopoly made me read it essentially. This is a young adult dystopian that is set in the UK after Brexit and Scottish independence, and it is about a set of teenagers that are recruited into the army to keep the country running as war is breaking out everywhere. Now, the reason I didn't want to read this to start off with is because it is a little bit too close to the bone with the UK currently in the process of leaving the European Union. However, as soon as I started reading this, I made it through 10 pages. The writing was very simplistic and really not my style at all. It was pretty much like, we went here and we did this man got out of this car and he said this, and then we went there and we want this, which is not a writing style I enjoy to read. As well as that, it discussed the main characters of this book who have been recruited into the army and are currently around to provide security to essential workers, which, while we are currently in a pandemic situation where there are actually essential workers who are still going to work while everyone else is in lockdown, just a little bit too close to the bone combined with a writing style that I knew I wouldn't like. So I did DNF this and I will be unhauling it. We then had another 5-star read, albeit a low 5-star, which was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mihurin. So this is a book that is very love or hate in the community. I have seen numerous rant reviews for this book. However, even the people who hate this book have told me that I will really love it. So when I went into this, I was a little bit trepidatious because I didn't know which way I was going to go, but I trusted you guys that based on the romance elements, I would really like this. And yeah, it was right up my alley. I loved it. So this is a young adult fantasy romance that takes place in a setting that is inspired by historical France and follows a witch and a witch hunter who are forced into marriage. So the main plot of this book is pretty much the dynamics of the witch and the witch hunter, Lou and Reed, as they navigate this marriage that they have both been forced into. However, in the background of this, there is an ongoing war between the witches and the witch hunters. The witch hunters are incredibly pious and religious, and while it is not explicit on the page, I imagine that the religion is Catholicism. It is definitely Christianity, but I would hazard a guess at Catholicism as a Catholic. They are very strict, very close-minded, holy warrior types. On the other hand, the witches are very free-spirited and their magic relies on balance. So if you want to manifest something, you have to give something of equal measure in return. We also have elements of nature magic, blood magic, and ritual sacrifice in here. The world is incredibly sexist. This is the kind of place where when a woman marries a man, she then becomes his property, and women are pretty much expected to be meek, mild, and pretty and do everything that the men tell them to. And because of this, our main female character Lou causes Reed a lot of frustration when she is very wild at heart and she will not do absolutely anything that he tells her to. Not even on principle, it is literally just because she does not want to. I actually really liked the character of Lou because just essentially saying a big fuck you to society and a big fuck you to this relationship that she's been forced into is totally 100% something that I would do, and I really loved her agency. As well as that, just watching Reed get increasingly frustrated at her and reprimanding her, not in like a super serious way, but him telling her like stop doing this and her just continuing to do it, was a great source of amusement for me throughout this book. The character of Reed in here is very much like Matthias from Six of Crows. He is a young man who has been indoctrinated into this lifestyle. He didn't have a choice and he believes everything that the witch hunters believe in wholeheartedly, even down to the point where they don't even consider witches to be women. They refer to them as it as opposed to she or her. Now, as I said, Reed as a character is very similar to Matthias, so I'm pretty sure that you guys can guess where his character arc goes in this book, as Lou and Reed do eventually begin to grow closer. I did really like their dynamic together because they do have quite a sharp contrast to each other, and while things did get a little bit steamy and there was definitely chemistry and sexual tension there, I also really liked the comedic value that this just generally had. I did also really love Shelby Mihurin's writing. That is one of the aspects of this book that I didn't expect to love. When I saw so many people hating this book, I did think that it was going to be the writing style that really let this book down and the thing that I really didn't like about it. However, I think that the woman can write. I think that the writing in here is very strong. It does use the French language frequently, most often for cursing. I do know a little bit of French, but only really to translate words, so I can't say whether this is grammatically correct or if it's accurate. And I did mention this in one of my reading vlogs, and I had two people who are both both native French speakers. One said that it was very inaccurate and one said that it was accurate and grammatically correct. So I don't know which one to go with, but I cannot say from experience, but I did really love the way that this book was written. I only really have two negatives for this book. The first is that the beginning felt quite rushed. For this story to get started, there had to be a reason for Lou and Reed to get married, so the beginning kind of felt like a race to get to this point so that we could actually get to the core parts of the story. My other negative is that the ending lined up extremely predictably, and by that I don't mean that the plot twists, the reveals and everything at the end were predictable, although I did kind of see them come in a little bit, but the way that this book ended lined everything up in a way that I completely expected it to open for a sequel. I can't really explain it any better than that, but essentially I just know where the sequel is going. After the main plot event, like the main conflict wrapped up at the end of this, everything kind of just fell into place exactly the way I expected it to. Ready for book 2. So overall, I would say that I really liked the romance in here. A very strong book. This is definitely one of the best debuts that I've read in a long time, and aside from those minor gripes that I had, the only other thing I really have to say about this is that the reason that this is just a very low 5-star is because Reed is just not really my type when reading romantic stories. He's the pious holy warrior type, and I prefer like the dark immortal warrior guy, but overall I would definitely recommend this, especially for the romance, the setting and the writing. I then read an ebook, and that was Maybe Now by Colleen Hoover. This was my least favorite book of the month so far. This is the final book in Colleen Hoover's Maybe series, which is a new adult romance series that follows Sydney and Ridge. Sydney is a college student. She majors in music and she lives with her roommates and her boyfriend. Every night at 8 p.m. she goes out onto the balcony to listen to the boy across the complex playing guitar. One day he notices her singing along to his song even though he himself has not been singing, so he holds up a message with his number on and asks her to text him the lyrics that she's been singing because he writes songs for his brother's band, but he's been struggling with some writer's block. While this is happening, Sydney discovers that her boyfriend is cheating on her with her roommate and she has to get out of that apartment as fast as possible. And where does she end up living but with Ridge? So pretty much the series is about those two as they grow closer while they're writing music together. So the first thing I want to say about this is that this is a Wattpad story. I'm not sure if the first book was traditionally published, but the second book definitely felt fan servicey. I don't think that the first book was self-published for Wattpad originally, but I do think that the second book was written for fans, and you could tell. In this sequel, we still followed Ridge and Sydney, and it was very clear that their relationship did not need anything adding to it, because I found that the characters were talking in circles. There was drama for the sake of drama, and I love me some drama and angst. My issue is that the characters were kind of going against things that they'd agreed to in the first book. There are quite a few unique circumstances here that the characters were all knowledgeable about. However, in this second book, they've decided that they now want to have issues with it. I did enjoy the two new perspectives that we had in this book, which were Maggie and Jake. Maggie is a side character from the first book and Jake is a brand new character, and I feel like the book could have just been about them two with Sydney and Ridge as side perspectives, to be honest. As well as that, I just didn't feel like the writing was as strong in this book as it has been in previous Colleen Hoover books I've read, and it wasn't as compelling as I usually feel Colleen Hoover books are. However, what I will say is that this series does have a lot of representation. I can't speak on whether it's good or not, but there is a deaf character in there, and there is also a character who is living with long-term illnesses, cystic fibrosis and diabetes. But overall, I gave this 2 stars. I'm not mad that I read it. It didn't ruin the series for me because maybe Someday is not my favorite Colleen Hoover book that I've read anyway, but it's definitely not my favorite book by her or my favorite book of the month. And then finally, the last book I've read so far in April is Children of the Whales Volume 4 by Abby Umeda. This is an older young adult manga series that follows an archivist called Chikoro who lives on something called the Mud Whale, which is this big floating island that goes along on the sea of sand. The Mud Whale and its inhabitants are incredibly isolated. They believe that they're pretty much the only people to exist ever, and they all have very specific roles on that island. Whenever they do happen to float past another island, they usually send scouts out to gather supplies. However, one day when they do this, they find another human, which blows their whole world entirely open. This leads to a chain of events that I did not expect going into this series. This is definitely a lot more brutal and gory than I expected. expected it to be. I picked this series up originally because I really liked the cover art. I like the art style in general, but combined with the pretty pastel aesthetics of the covers of this series, I did not expect it to go in the direction that the series went. However, I'm really glad that it did. So this is volume 4. I gave this one 3 stars. It's not my favorite of the 4 volumes I've read so far. The reason why I didn't like this as much as previous volumes is because the thing that I'm more interested about in this series is learning more about the world. Because with this book being told from the perspectives of people who live on the Mud Whale, they obviously have a very isolated view of absolutely everything, and I enjoy trying to piece together how much is kind of like the real world and how much is fantasy. Now, the majority of this is fantasy. There are elements of the real world that these guys didn't comprehend. Things like countries, they didn't know what a country was, and I just find it really interesting to learn about the people who are very isolated, and I also find it fascinating to read from their perspective. Now, this volume in particular, I would say, is the second half of a story arc, so it was pretty much solidly action based, as it followed the second half of a very big event that the 2 previous volumes have been building up to. Because of that, we didn't have a lot of the thing I love, which is learning about the world and learning about more people and learning how the Mud Whale fits into the world. It was pretty much just wall-to-wall action, and even though obviously I'm not dumb, I know that the pictures in here tell the story. It's a manga. I do find it harder to follow frames that are solidly images without any text at all. It's something that I struggled with when I was reading Junji Ito, and that is because as a person I am not very visual. I can't read a diagram to save my life, so I do prefer manga and graphic novels that have quite a bit of text in them. So very action-based things are just generally not my favorite. But overall, I still really love this series. I enjoyed this volume and I will be continuing on. So that is about it, finally, for my mid-April wrap-up. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Let me know in my comments whether you are participating in the owls. How well are you doing? Are you slumping? Are you thriving? Let me know in my comments. But that is about it from me today, guys. So please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.